and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Today's episode, it's a special one. It's my Season 3 year-end wrap-up. You know, whether you've been with me from the very beginning or you just found your way here to my show this year, I want to take a moment and say thank you. All of your support, each and every one of you, it means the world to me. You know, and as we look back today on this incredible year, on these past 3 years, I'm excited to celebrate what we have all achieved together, because this show is not just about me, it's really about the community. This year has been nothing really short of amazing for the Kink Perspective, and it really is all thanks to you, my incredible listeners. When I look back on everything we've accomplished together over 2024, I'm blown away. I've always believed in the power of authentic conversations here around kink, especially about psychology and mental health. But seeing this community grow and thrive has been more rewarding than really I ever imagined, especially when I started this show a few years ago. I want to share with you all a few stats today. I don't often kind of toot my horn, and I don't really, I've done this show. There's really been nothing behind it. So today I want to share with you how amazing, because I've watched, behind the scenes, I see all my stats. I've watched the show grow, and I want to share this all with you all because you all have made this possible. First off, and I'm the most proud of this, my show has been heard and is listened to and is streamed in 105 countries. That is incredibly amazing. That's an international reach that I never even expected when I started. As far as podcasts go globally, I'm in the top 10%. And when I first started, I couldn't have dreamed that I'd reach such a milestone. And this speaks to the incredible community that you all have helped build around this show. The follower base on the show has grown by an astonishing 134%. This year alone, on Spotify, over 600 new followers and listeners. And that's huge. I couldn't be more excited to see the show grow and continue to expand. And, I know for some podcasts, I'm not Joe Rogan, and I'm not these bigger crime podcasts and shows like that are out there. I'm this little indie podcast doing this all on my own. I pay for it all on my own. I've invested everything on my own. I don't ask for, people to buy me stuff. I'm not about that. Everything I do here is for you all and the community. And watching the show's base grow and sharing and getting this out there is really exciting. And it makes me remember why I'm doing this. Streams increased this year by 17%. That brought the total of amount of plays to over 33,000 on across all the platforms that this show is streamed on. That's 33,000 moments where you all chose to listen and engage with what's going on here. In total, listeners have spent nearly over 2,000 hours on the Kink Perspective this year alone. That's almost 16,000 streams alone. And to me, that's more than just numbers. It's really a reflection of the trust you've all placed inside of this podcast and allowed me to speak for the experiences and our needs that need to be said and discussed. And there is something special about knowing that what you're putting out into this world is resonating with people from all walks of life. Now, whether you've been with me since the early episodes or just tuned in this year, you've all been an essential part of this journey for me. You've shown up. You've engaged. Some of you have shared your thoughts, emailed me questions in ways that make this show feel like it's a living, breathing conversation for me. And I truly couldn't ask for any more of a supportive community. And every time I see these numbers, the countries, the amount played, the growth of all the listeners, it reminds me of how much you have all made this show possible. Because the show doesn't grow if no one's listening. The show doesn't grow if people aren't engaged with it. If people aren't sharing or talking about it or asking me questions or sending me messages or wanting me to discuss or revisit subjects, and I can't thank you enough for that. These milestones are as much yours as they are mine, because without your support and feedback, none of this is possible. And I want to take a moment to really express how grateful I truly am for all of that. That engagement, your passion, your dedication are what makes this podcast really special place for all of these conversations. I want to talk a little bit about even some of my listeners this year as I've started to kind of unravel more. I think over the last couple of years, I didn't really pay attention to who is listening or what. But this year, I decided to kind of look at who's listening as far as demographics and even ages. And it's been quite interesting. Yes, I'm still battling a little bit of COVID, but I'm 3 weeks now, hopefully on the mend. I'm almost there. So thank you for those questions and follow-ups. Absolutely. I appreciate it. As far as our listeners go, I've learned a lot more about who you are as listeners. And let me tell you, it's absolutely fascinating to me to have such a diverse community and range of people. It's been so inspiring to see the wide range of people tuning in and finding out the value in what's discussed here. The Kink Perspective has always been about creating an open and honest space for exploring kink and psychology and BDSM and mental health, and seeing that resonate with so many of you is incredibly rewarding for me. And it reminds me why I keep doing the show week after week, so far year after year, and what I really like about doing it the most. And it's why I keep coming back, right? It's why I keep doing this over and over. So this year, the majority of you that are tuning in are between the ages of 35 and 44, which speaks volumes about the need for real and transparent conversations around kink, sexuality, BDSM, and mental health, especially as we grow older and face more complex relationships and self-discovery. And whether you're navigating some long-term stuff or your own personal growth, or you're simply finding the courage to explore new sides of yourself, I'm thrilled to know that this podcast that I've created is part of that journey. But even more exciting is to see how our listener base continues to evolve. Now, what's really interesting here is that about 55% of you, almost 56% of you listening are women. That's great. I'm glad I'm getting a chance to speak to you and you're listening and you're challenging me in some of my thinking. But what's really interesting to me now is men make up almost 33% of this audience. And that's something I'm genuinely excited about, because when I started, I knew I wanted to create a space really for everybody's voice, regardless of your gender or your background or your race or your religion. And I really wanted to see more men that are joining in and engaging with these conversations. And it shows me how important it is to open up the discussions that have historically been less talked about. And the fact that this show is becoming more inclusive and more of a true reflection of the diverse people who make up kink and our psychological and mental health communities, it means the world to me. I really want to emphasize it's not just about the numbers, though. It's about the stories, the conversations I've had, the relationships I'm building with everybody, and we're building with each other. And each time I get a message or an email, or I hear from somebody about how something I've discussed here resonates with them or helps them feel less alone, it reinforces why I started doing this podcast in the first place. It's the deep, vulnerable connections we're all forging together that, for me, matter the most. And let me be honest with you, I actually answer every email I get, every message I get, every comment I get on social media. I respond. And it does take a lot of my time. Sometimes I don't get to respond as much as I'd like or email as much in depth as I could, but I want you to know I hear you and I see you and I respond. And that means a lot to me. And as this community continues to grow, I'm really grateful for all of you. You've made the show more than just, the Kink Perspective is more now than just a podcast. You've made it into something authentic and put a space in here for ongoing conversations. And I can't wait to see where these connections take us in the future. Now, this year, we saw some really standout episodes that clearly resonated with so many of you. Each one kind of sparked some new discussions for me. They brought up some thoughtful questions, had me revisit some things, deepened maybe our collective understanding of BDSM. And while I can't pick a favorite, here are a few that stood out to all of you as your absolute favorites. Now, first, I want to kind of apologize for my first shows in the beginning when I very first started. I don't know, probably about the first 5 or 6 shows. They were kind of robotic, and I admit that. I think I was kind of finding my pace and finding how I was going to speak, because it's difficult, especially when you hear yourself. But this year, the top 3 shows that drew the most listeners in or were played and streamed the most, the first one was Season 1, Episode 3, BDSM and Mindful Intimacy. And this episode seemed to really strike a chord with listeners who were exploring the whole emotional layers of kink intimacy. I kind of went into how mindfulness both enhanced our physical and emotional aspects of the lifestyle. And it sparked a couple of really engaging discussions within the community, with a lot of you sharing how the concept of mindful intimacy changed your view and connection of your relationships. The next episode that really seemed to draw a lot of you in was Season 2, Episode 16, BDSM and Praise Kink. I actually revisited that show and kind of did a follow-up on that one this year. But Praise Kink is one of those subjects that can be both delicate and really incredibly rewarding to explore. On this episode, I kind of looked at how Praise Kink, plays a crucial role in nurturing self-esteem and emotional intimacy. And I'm not surprised that this one kind of resonated with so many people so deeply, because I think it opened up an important conversation about how kink can be a way to connect with our own self-worth. And it really is a topic that often doesn't get a lot of attention that it really does deserve, but apparently a lot of you connected with it, and that makes me happy. But the episode this year that was really streamed a lot and apparently resonated the most was Season 3, Episode 34, Women, Kink, Politics, and More, with 2 of my favorite people inside of FetLife, the Stormy One and Raven. And this episode was really powerful discussion between the intersections of BDSM and identity, how they have their voice, and politics, how all of these things kind of really resonate, and that this was the view from 2 women who aren't afraid to voice their opinions and kind of stand up for what they believe in. And here it really does paint a clear picture that, this deeper dive into how BDSM fits into our larger cultural conversations, how that resonated with you from the perspective of 2 women, that they can have their voice and have their thoughts on BDSM and their position, and be assertive as far as, even politics go. It's not just about the kink itself, it's about how the community does reflect and respond to the world around us. These are just a few of the highlights, and I loved hearing how these episodes sparked so much reflection and so many conversations. And your responses have shown me that we're not just discussing BDSM for the sake of BDSM. We're kind of getting into spaces that are emotional and psychological, and even some political layers that make such a rich part of our lives a little bit more alive. And this is what makes the podcast so special. It's a place where we can grow and evolve, and that engagement from every one of you shows me that we're building something truly impactful. Now, another part of this has been, the guests I've had and some of the conversation. And this year I've had a few more guests on. I'm really hoping that next year I'm going to have even more people. Scheduling and conflicts happen a lot. You'd be surprised with me trying to get people to come on the show. It's not always as easy as it sounds by just, hey, do you want to be on and let's talk about things. It's a lot more structured than that, and it takes time. But this year, I had the absolute privilege of sitting down with some truly extraordinary people that are in the lifestyle, and every single one of them brought something unique and valuable to the table. For me, these conversations were unforgettable, and I'm deeply grateful to each one of my guests who took time to share their experiences with us. And they weren't just insightful, they were raw, they were vulnerable, and they were filled sometimes with humor, mainly from me, sometimes from them. And that's what I love about this. It allows me to give the space to hear people be authentic, which is what the lifestyle is about, living our authentic selves. I sat down with Honeybee and she brought a little bit of her humor and her honesty to the conversation. And from the start, it was clear it was going to be one of those real talks that we've had about living authentically in the lifestyle. And, she was open and vulnerable, and it resonated so with so many of you. And I believe we really got into some meaningful territory, and it challenged a little bit of some preconceived notions along the way. And I've already mentioned Raven and Stormy, but let me say, their conversation, that was a wonderful 2 hours plus of my life, but it allowed me to hear the other side of what women think and what they deal with and their views, and allowing themselves to have a voice inside of the lifestyle and not be afraid to use it. And then I sat down with recently Dr. Spankologist, and what's great is he's an educator inside of the community as far as spanking. We talked about, his love for spanking and being a spanko, being a spanko himself and being a spanky, what that entails, how that community, is a subset of the lifestyle. And earlier this year, I spoke with Corey and Cassandra, and they're two parents that are navigating the lifestyle, and they opened up about how they balance, family and life, and how they, approach it in a really responsible way. And it's a really beautiful reminder that, BDSM isn't separate from the rest of our lives. It's part of who we are, and it can be integrated into a lot of different aspects for us, including family and parenthood. And that's pretty profound. Each one of these conversations has had a lasting impression on me, and I'm really thankful that these people took time out of their lives to share their stories and insights with all of you. They made this show richer, more diverse, more meaningful, and I can't wait to see what I can bring to you all in next season's lineup. And the variety of the depth of these conversations continues to push the boundaries, and I want to do that with all of you. I want to keep exploring that and bringing some more psychology into it, and talking maybe this year we'll attack a few more notions because they need to be. But I'm excited for what's to come. I want to give you a little bit about some behind the scenes, because I get this question a little bit quite often. First, this year I put out 50 episodes. And that's a little over, it's quite actually well over 25 hours of content, if not a little bit more. And that's a pretty big milestone for me. I'm really incredibly proud of it because I wanted to be very consistent for all of you. But behind every episode, there's a lot of hard work. Sometimes I've got a fair bit of chaos going on. And of course, there's some funny moments that make it worth it. And I want to tell you about one behind-the-scenes story that happened to me while I was prepping to do an episode earlier this year. Now I'm all ready to go. I've got my computer, I've got my mic set up, I've got everything kind of ready to go. And outside, this bird lands on the windowsill, which is fine. I've got birds all around, and it's nothing big. But when he lands, he decides that we're going to have a conversation. And I mean, my God, it was nonstop. Like he's auditioning for a role in a bird-themed action movie. Now, no matter what I tried, closing the windows, playing music, walking up, trying to shoo him away, not even my whole, please get out of here face. None of this was working. No matter what I did, that bird always came back, and he came back louder every time. It's like he had something important that he wanted to get on the show and say. Now, this nearly 2 hour long battle of wills between me and this determined little bird, it culminated. And I mean, at one point I thought about recording with this bird as my first uninvited guest at the beginning of this year. But, finally, after what I felt like an eternity of his squawking, the little guy flew away. And I was finally able to get the show out and done in peace, only to realize I'd lost half my notes along the way that I wanted to cover. And it's kind of that moment that reminds me of how unpredictable and often how hilarious it can be. This whole process can really turn out to be. No matter how much planning goes into every episode that I want to do, there's always something unexpected that keeps things interesting for me. Now, whether it's a little bird deciding to add some impromptu sound effects or a last minute change in the schedule, there's always something that keeps me on my toes. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Because the unplanned moments here are the ones that truly make this journey unforgettable. And a lot of times they actually lead me to what I'm going to do on the show. Although I always release on the same day, there are a lot of times I don't know what I'm going to talk about until the day of. I have a whole list, but I've got to actually feel each show. And that's kind of how it leads me. You know, as we head into season 4, I'm actually really excited more than ever about the future of the Kink Perspective. In 2025, I'm looking at some exciting new features and enhancements for the show. First, I'm thinking about launching a dedicated website for the podcast. And it's going to be kind of the go-to place for all things Kink Perspective, episode archives, resources, maybe some exclusive content, more of my downloadable content, like some of the resource sheets I've put together. I think that might be beneficial. I'd love to hear your feedback on that. If you want something more dedicated, it's a little bit different. I think some people put up websites because they're trying to attract something, but if somebody's out there and they have more experience with that, let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear. I'm also looking to be expanding the conversation a little bit further. I'm going to dive into some new topics, explore some more perspectives. I'm lining up some really incredible people, and I can't wait to introduce them to you. I did not get a chance to get a hold of the gentleman in the UAE. I talked to him about BDSM more there before the end of this year. I haven't done my show on grooming standards or anal sex yet, and I ran out of time. That's the unfortunate part. And COVID hit me really hard, and so there was a lot of things that I kind of lost along the way in the last couple of weeks, but I've still managed. I struggled a little bit along the way, but I've still managed. But, I'd love to hear your ideas. Are there any topics you want me to go into? Are there any guests inside of the community you want to hear more from? So maybe, obviously I know, I love Hate the Rope community, but if you'd like to hear more of that or me challenging them, drop me a message in the comments sections, right? Hit me up on Spotify or email me, thekinkperspective@gmail.com. I'm always looking for ways to make the show better for you. And I also want to say, and finally say this, a huge thank you to those who supported the show through some of your donations. Your contributions have kept the podcast running and enabled me to continue creating the best content I can for you. And if you're interested in collaborating or sponsoring the show or being a guest, let's connect. My inbox is always open, right? As we wrap up this season, I just want to say how deeply thankful I am for each and every one of you. Thank you for listening, for sharing, for leaving reviews, for making this community what it is. I'm so proud of what we've accomplished in 2024. I truly believe we're just getting started. And if you're just starting to follow me, hit the like button, hit the follow button. Please rate me on Spotify. If you follow me, please rate me on Apple Podcasts. On Spotify, you need the app on your phone, and you click you got to listen for a little bit. Click the 3 little buttons at the top by the name of my show, go to rate my show and hit 5 stars. When you do this, right now, it keeps my show for free. It keeps getting and spreading the voice out there. It's going to let the show get bigger. It's going to allow me to draw in more content that you all want to hear. That's the only thing I'm asking is just please rate my show. Please rate it 5 stars so I can keep it growing. I can't wait to see what 2025 brings for the show and for all of us together. And until then, everybody, I wish you all a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year. Be safe and stay kinky.